as many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, there are two articles I would refer to in my debate. So I want all to know that I would adopt such articles and I would sign at the end. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill before us, the Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiatives Bill 2022, is important legislation in our national response to the global climate emergency. This is an area in which the government and opposition can agree. This is a new type of legislation for our country. Continued increases in temperatures and the melting of polar glaciers may lead to sea level rises that could wipe out much of the land mass of countries such as ours. We all must take the threat seriously and do our part to limit the warming of our planet due to human activity. The recent onslaught of hurricanes, including Hurricane Dorian, traumatized for Bahamians the severe and devastating effects of a warming planet. This includes more powerful storms and weather events, including deadly floods, fires, and droughts around the world. And such major destructive storms, a rising sea level, coastal erosions, the dying of coral reefs, and other examples demonstrate the particular threat to small island nations and archipelagos of climate change. Mr. Deputy, before I speak to the objectives of this bill, I wish to offer some context about the effects of climate change on countries like the Bahamas. After visiting the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian, Alexander Agosti served as the principal author of a World Bank blog dated October 17, 2019, in which he described what he saw in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. He quote, "I have never seen this level of destruction. I was deployed to Haiti after 2010 earthquake, New York after Superstorm Sandy, Northeast Nigeria after the worst of the Boko Haram insurgency, and to Somalia and Malawi after devastating droughts and floods delivered destruction on the tragic level." He went on to say, "But mere walking through the worst areas of Abaco in northern Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian provided a glimpse of what total devastation really looks like." He further went on to say, "Informal settlements like Pigeon Peas and the mud in downtown Marsh Harbor on the Abaco Islands are now completely flattened, littered with the remnants of daily life such as appliances, clothing, and construction debris. Cars and shipping containers lay everywhere, tossed around as children's toys. Close to the waterfront, where colorful restaurants, marinas, and inns once stood, only the battered remnants of buildings remained." He further said, "And in the worst hit areas, as my colleague Paloma Zapata stated, the stench is gut-wrenching. This is surely the smell of death." And the World Bank blog continued, "Clearly, it will take a massive, years-long effort to recover, But the Bahamas has the benefit of starting out with some of the fundamental ingredients necessary for recovery. That is, a government that understands the threat of climate change and the importance of building back better. International partners who are committed to supporting and investing in recovery efforts. A private sector that is rolling up its sleeves. And importantly, communities that are determined to bounce back from the fury of Hurricane Dorian. Mr. Deputy, on September 27, 2019, weeks after Hurricane Dorian, I addressed the UN General Assembly, and I wish to reiterate some of what I said at that time to the Bahamian people and to the international community, which remains just as urgent today. I quote, "The Bahamas inhabits approximately 180,000 square miles of ocean, with 17 principal islands, with cities, towns, and settlements, with names like Marsh Harbor, Hopetown, 8 Mile Rock, West End, and Sweetings Key, reflecting the rich and diverse heritage of our country." Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield once noted, quote, "From space, the Bahamas is the most beautiful place on earth." He went on to say, "The Bahamas are gorgeous. The deep trench in the ocean floor, called the tongue of the ocean, which comes between the islands, is the most beautiful deep indigo color. With great pride, we delight in sharing our archipelago, our vibrant culture, and our wonderful wonders, our natural wonders, with millions of visitors from around the world. We are stewards of this natural treasury for ourselves and for humanity. But this surpassing beauty and our very existence of a country of many low-lying islands and over 2,400 keys are under grave threat. It is a threat, Mr. Speaker, which we did not cause. It is a threat which we cannot survive on our own. And while many countries have coastal cities or zones, the entire Bahamas is a coastal zone of many keys and islands in an extensive archipelago. Over the last 3 decades, hurricanes have grown increasingly lethal throughout our region. The small island countries in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean and around the world are on the front lines of being swallowed into an abyss created initially by human activity and increasingly by inaction. Our vulnerabilities as states on the front line are profound. Coral and mangrove degradation, land erosion, increased tidal movements, and the myriad other consequences of global warming increase our vulnerability and handicap our ability to develop and to establish effective resilience measures. I further stated we cannot make meaningful progress toward or achieve sustainable development goals if, as forecasters are predicting, that recent cyclonic and other extreme climate events are poised to become the new normal and may worsen. And when one storm can obliterate an island state or a number of states in one hurricane season, how will we survive? How can we develop? How will we continue to exist? I further said, so I add my urgent plea to the cries and voices of many other leaders and citizens of the global commons, urging the nations of the world here assembled at this General Assembly to treat the global climate emergency as the greatest challenge facing humanity. It is a challenge that, if not treated with greatest urgency, will continue to ravage small island states such as the Bahamas, and will also have a devastating impact on more developed states. The Bahamas fully supports the Secretary General's comprehensive strategy to address a global emergency which will eventually devastate the entire planet. And this includes his plea to international financial institutions to provide concessionary financing to countries severely impacted by the external shocks occasioned by climate change. The Bahamas, especially with many islands and keys requiring basic infrastructure, has major vulnerabilities and resilience deficiencies. And we must urgently address these vulnerabilities in order to secure our citizens and to protect vital public and private infrastructure. For many years, the Bahamas and countries with similar characteristics have urged an alternative to per capita gross national income as the sole indicator of a country's level of development and eligibility for concessionary financing. When we call for consideration of a country's unique local circumstances, when determining financial worthiness, this is also a condition and requirement for our resilience. I further said the Bahamas is a testament to the ability of small island developing states to manage debt despite such external shocks, end quote. Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we may have our policy and political disagreements, we share common purpose and common cause as political parties to protect and to preserve our Commonwealth. And this bill seeks to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emissions. The bill before us has as its objectives to enable the government to create incentives and implement initiatives to support the overall global target of greenhouse gas emission reduction, consistent with its nationally determined contributions. To ensure compliance by the Bahamas of its obligations under the Paris Agreement, taking into consideration the common but differentiated responsibilities, respective capabilities, and flexibility provisions acknowledged under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for small island developing states to address climate change and to enable the establishment of a market in the Bahamas to trade in carbon credits. These are good and necessary objectives. As with all legislation, the implementation is key in terms of how the government apparatus will work or not work. According to the bill, the administration of this new legislation will include the shared ministerial responsibility of the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister responsible for Environment and National Resources. The appointment of a management company, the functions of which will be those functions specified in Clause 7, and the appointment and functions of an advisory council, which will have responsibility for serving as a technical advisory body to a management company. Who and which parts of the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, will specifically be responsible for the implementation and oversight of this legislation. There are many laws in our books, Mr. Deputy, but the so-called devils and angels are in the details. This legislation should not just be window dressing. What role might the delivery unit in OPM play in the oversight of this legislation. Clause 30 of the bill provides for the extensive regulation making power of the Prime Minister, with experts and who will be utilized to create and to oversee various regulations. What is the timetable for the creation of the various regulations? Will they be designed and implemented with transparency and accountability? When will the advisory council be appointed? Will the government publicly announce the members of this council? The bill states, for the purpose of this act, the Minister of Finance may enter into a management contract with a reputable company to perform any of the functions specified in Section 7. A management company shall have expertise and be qualified in the environmental field and financial markets. The Minister of Finance may, in writing, modify the terms and conditions of a management contract and may be necessary and agreed, as may be necessary and agreed to by the parties. Nothing in subsection 1 shall prohibit the minister from entering into more than one management contract, provided that no more than one management contract shall be appointed to manage or sell the same class or type of carbon credits. Mr. Deputy, like any market, the carbon credit market has good actors and companies, as well as those who engage in such markets with corrupt practices and funny business in mind. We must ensure that the good name of the Bahamas is not corrupted by domestic or international individuals and companies who will use our country for corrupt or other purposes. What other measures is the government going to use, including our range of regulatory agencies, to oversee the carbon market in our Bahamas? I note, Mr. Deputy, that the legislation does speak appropriately and directly to the issue of double counting. The international emissions trading and carbon market are worth many billions of dollars. Again, the Bahamas must ensure that this market is not sullied or taken advantage of those who are not serious or those who seek to engage in corrupt practices or activities. Mr. Deputy, again, while I support this bill, I raise several advisory points for the governing side. In the Bahamas, we are good at passing legislation. We often fall short in the afterwork, which is critical to making the legislation meaningful. If the government is serious about this legislation, it should commit to bringing it into force soon after its passage in both houses of Parliament. It is not good enough to have plenty talk in Parliament, pass the law, and then leave it lingering for months or years without enactment. If the government does that, it would mean all of this here today was for nothing. Additionally, many rules and organizations needed to be created, organized, and funded for this legislation to work. A management company or management companies have to be selected to lead this carbon trading scheme by the government. An advisory council has to be appointed to serve as a technical advisory body to a management company and to provide advice to the Prime Minister. A national admissions registry has to be created along with the appointment of a registrar. A lot of work and a lot of money and many people will be needed to make this work. Is the government serious about doing the hard work to make this legislation successful? What we know of this government is it likes to appoint its supporters to plush jobs. With the New Day government, just use this legislation, will the New Day government just use this legislation to allow its supporters, whom it appoints, to travel all over the world to climate change conferences or at taxpayers' expenses? Bahamians support measures to combat climate change. I repeat, Bahamians support measures to combat climate change. However, Bahamians would view this very seriously. When it is time to select a management company or companies as set out in the bill, will only PLP firms be considered? For success, we need the best people appointed to the roles set out in this proposed law. For success, we need the best companies selected to manage what the legislation set out. And if the New Day administration fills these roles with PLPs only, who are just in it for the money, this legislation will fail. Always remember, PLPs do not have monopolies on knowledge, nor does F&M. But Bahamians working together, we can succeed. Mr. Deputy, in our 2021 election manifesto, in the section entitled The Environment and Renewable Energy, the Free National Movement pledged the following, which I offer to the government by way of recommendations. To do our part in the fight against climate change and to transition our economy more toward renewable energy in the next term, we intend to, 1, set an effective minimum SARE rating for importation of air conditioning systems to ensure only energy-efficient air conditioners are used in the Bahamas. 2, lower duty on all home appliances that meet a defined energy efficiency standard. 3, pass and enact a Renewable Energy Encouragement Act to facilitate activity in a robust Bahamian-led sector. 4, through various incentives, allow independent power producers to start building a selection of renewable energy plants. 5, installation of solar PV systems on government buildings. Lower duty on all fully electrical vehicles. Make renewable energy 30% of electricity needs by 2030. Build solar plants for family islands. Expand solar street lightings to more communities across our country. Increase penalties for illegal dumping. Ensure there are proper waste management sites across the family islands. You would remember that we had chronic problems with our dump site on Hall Road, and that is now being corrected. Establish an organized national campaign to address the rodent problem. Mr. Deputy, while I'm on my feet, I only want to point out so that all can hear that I live in the tropical garden area next to Gambia, and within the tropical garden area, an application came forth, and our government for what we thought was repair of cars and sale or rental of SD cars. It was denied because it's a residential area. And immediately after election, on October 10th, it was subsequently passed. We in the tropical garden area are trying our best to stop this from proceeding. It's a residential area, and we do not feel that cars should be repaired, nor rented or sold from within the areas of individuals' beautiful homes, which can subsequently cause deterioration and devaluation of their homes and possibly the introduction of rodents. I hope all within the Ministry of Works and Town Planning hear my voice as I speak for my constituency and my neighborhood and cease the progression of such development. Develop and enact land use management plans on all major islands to create a structure as to how land is developed. Rigorous enforce environmental laws and rules. Invest in further protection of and upgrade to our national parks and create robust waste-to-energy programs around the country, the partnership with the private sector in order to provide electricity to landfill sites and surrounding areas. Mr. Deputy, major countries and international bodies are good at making pledges to help small island states to build resilience and to combat climate change. But they largely and continually fail to deliver on these big promises. May I appeal to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environmental Affairs by way of encouragement to continue to work with CARICOM and other partners to press the international community for specific funds and assistance in the areas of renewable energy and climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. May I also recommend that the work on solarization at the Office of the Prime Minister be completed as a good example of the country. We had commenced a program to completely solarize the Office of the Prime Minister and introduce within the parking lot of the Prime Minister's office solar facilities for all vehicles coming into the OPM as solarized vehicles or electrical vehicle. I wish to address one other area related to environmental protection. During our last administration, a ban on single-use plastics was brought into effect, bringing the Bahamas in line with global environmental practices. But there's more work to be done on plastic pollution here at home and around the world. I note that a few weeks ago, that the most recent Our Ocean Conference was held in one of Pacific nations under the theme, Our Ocean, Our People, Our Prosperity. The President of the UN General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, who is from Maldives, which is on the front line of addressing the climate change crisis, further urged the international community to address plastic pollution, among other areas of environmental concern. A report on the conference on the United Nations website noted, and I quote, "Just last week, researchers found, and it's important to listen, researchers found for the first time microplastics in lungs of humans, highlighting the scale of severity of the problem." Further went on, given that plastic takes hundreds of years to degrade, it is estimated that only about 20% of the plastics created since 1950s has been incinerated or successfully recycled, highlighting the importance of amplifying synergies between our ocean action and other sustainable development goals, such as poverty reduction and sustainable consumption and production. Mr. Shahid reiterated the importance of a complete ban on plastic pollution in our ocean. Mr. Deputy, for this legislation to work, we must also educate our people on what this all means. Many do not understand fancy talk about carbon credits and trading. The government needs to find a way to communicate these proposed developments in a way in which the common person may understand. Otherwise, the people will think that the government may be mixed up in funny businesses and trying to take advantage of a lack of understanding of the new global regime. There's already a lot of misunderstanding as to how our natural resources industries work. From that misunderstanding has come much resentment that some are doing well of the commonwealth of our land and waters, while the common man and woman get nothing. Mr. Deputy, I thank you very much, and I hope the Ministry of Works and Town Planning would have heard my call as I speak as the member of Kalani and a member of the Tropical Garden Association who was plagued with such a problem that came about on October 10th of this year that we would like to be resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to participate in this carbon credit bill, which is now before us to be debated. May I ask your indulgence firstly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to allow me to extend condolences, to allow me to extend condolences to the family of Kirk Walken, and also to the Speaker of this House who lost loved ones yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I also ask your indulgence to allow me to speak to the wonderful people of Michael, mainly Meguana, Inagua, Crooked Island, Aucklands, and Long Key. These islands, Mr. Deputy, is the most challenging in the Commonwealth in terms of geographics. However, I want the people of Michael to know that better times are ahead with this new government led by the Member of Parliament for Rumkey and San Salvador, and the Honorable Chester Cooper, along with our New Day government, that I can let them know that they will not be left out in the cold. This New Day government will see to it that they get piece of the economic pie. However, I must remind them that while we are still a new government with just a few months in office, but unfortunately, everyone wants things happen now. Well, it will happen, but you must allow us time to do it. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the subject of carbon credits. What's meant by carbon credits? Carbon credit is a kind of permit that present 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere and can be purchased by a company to make up for carbon dioxide emission that comes from industrial production. Mr. Deputy Speaker, companies seek to offset greenhouse gases emissions, having now turned to carbon credits. Some environmentalists say they are doing little to show climate change. The Deputy Speaker, according to Ecosystems, market that produce is on track worth $1 billion. Carbon credit must often be created through agriculture and forestry practices that reduce emissions. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Bahamas can benefit from this market if the market stays on track to reach a record $6.7 billion. Based on current European compliance market, project carbon peak prices increased from 88% to about $67 per metric ton by 2030. In the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, it's possible that farmers can be paid to convert their fields into forests and sell their credits to corporations. According to estimates, the current weight carbon price is approximately $34.99 as of June 2021, which is up from $20 near the end of 2020. This will be good news for the Bahamas. if we adopt this path. Price of one carbon can vary from a few cents metric tons of CO2 emissions to $15 per metric tons of CO2, or even $20. Carbon pricing, Mr. Deputy, is an instrument that captures external costs of greenhouse gases emissions. In this way, overall environmental goal is achieved in most flexible and least cost ways to society. Placing an adequate price on greenhouse gas emissions is fundamental to external costs of climate change in the broadest possible range of economic incentives and clean development. This is what this piece of legislation is trying to do, into accounting our natural resources such as seagrass and mangroves. Mr. Speaker, the government carbon pricing is one of the instruments of climate policies packages needed to reduce emissions. In most cases, it also be a source of revenue, which is particularly important in our economic environment, budgetary constraints. We here in the Bahamas, with such an abundance natural resources, must take advantage of it and protect them from indiscriminate damages while trying to get whatever economic benefits from them. So this is what this bill is trying to achieve. What we are debating here today, destroying our forests and mangroves and seabeds, becoming very vital and critical to the economy of the Bahamas, and seek to benefit from it, this new carbon credit industry. During the life of a tree, it takes approximately 1 ton of carbon dioxide, which can take up to a century on an average. In 1 year, mature trees consume about 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Note that carbon equals approximately 1 ton of hydrogen fuel. In terms of carbon dioxide emission, that's equivalent to reduction of 1 metric ton of CO2 or equivalent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It immensely aids in promoting renewable green energy, options like solar energy and wind energy, and in funding projects on a nature conservation and restoration. Mr. Speaker, because the strength in which carbon credit has evolved, there are now programs that are known as the Family Forest Carbon Program, which enables families forest owners to access climate funding from the Caribbean market, empowering them to help address climate change while earning an income from their land. With this new industry emerging, it is possible for Bahamians to include in the Caribbean market, in the carbon market, in spite of the complexity, high up-end costs. The Family Forest Carbon Program was also designed simultaneously to meet the need of families, forest owners, policyholders, and companies, as well as we all work together to sequester the storm Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, I thank you once again for Michael and Michael's support this bill.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the documents to lie on the table. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. I'd like to, first of all, say a special good afternoon to all of the residents of Marco City and to once again express my appreciation for your continued support, your prayers, and your advice. I would also like to extend, Mr. Deputy, by way of you to our Speaker, sincere condolence on the passing of her brother, and to let her know that we have her in our thoughts and in our prayers. Today, I rise to give support to the Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiative Bill 2022. It is a bill for an act to give effect to the Paris Agreement and to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emissions. Mr. Deputy, before I look at a few portions of this bill, permit me in a very brief way to put in context how real this discussion is. Let me first say, in 2016, the team that I have the honor of working with, the very same team I met in place, who assisted multiple members of Parliament before me, diligently walked throughout the community of Grand Bahama, assisting residents in putting tarp on their roof, repairing homes that had been damaged by Matthew, provide resources for residents who needed help. The government at that time had not moved swiftly enough, and many residents were in dire need of assistance. Mr. Deputy, in the aftermath of catastrophic events, residents have learned to rely not just on government, but on faith-based organizations, NGOs, and others to provide assistance. And I recall the experience of 2016 vividly, because at that time, I was preparing to be a candidate in the upcoming election. I recall the impact of others being on the ground faster than government agencies, and how that negatively impacted the later efforts of that administration. Persons received the help that eventually came, but they remembered the moments in the aftermath of that hurricane where help was scarce. Some would argue that we experienced a similar situation in the aftermath of Dorian in certain communities. The point I make, Mr. Deputy, is that when people are hurting, governments that are in the chair have an obligation to move, the word once again, with a sense of urgency. Sometimes governments make determinations to mitigate against the accusation of doing something illegal or unethical to put systems in place. That's necessary, but not sufficient. When people are in dire straits, they need help with immediacy. It's not an unrealistic expectation, Mr. Deputy, especially since we live in a hurricane alley and Bahamians have a reasonable expectation that governments, being continuous, are fully aware of the potential for a catastrophic event and therefore the necessity to prepare or to be prepared. And so I always find it amazing when administrations, all those that I support and those on the other side, when we get enroused, patting ourselves on the back for a response by our standards, wonderful, by public standards, something else, for doing a job that is consistent with our remit, with our mandate, with what we have been elected to do. I believe, and we believe, that it's important to plan in advance. This piece of legislation, similar to those passed in 2019 under the Minnis administration, those passed in 2020 and 21, are a part of our, hopefully, shift to planning in advance to mitigate against what is almost certain to be catastrophic events in the future. At the core of the discussion that we're having today about addressing the issue of carbon markets is how do we put our country in a position where when it is impacted by a catastrophic event, we are able to rebound on a timely basis in order to get the wheels of a national economy moving again. Where will we get the resources from in order to accomplish that end? So this bill is important in at least two respects. One, that it is anticipating a potential for disaster and recognizing the need for resources that in the event that it occurs, we are in a better position to fund the requisite course of action. But more importantly, this bill examines what is a real reality for the globe, and that we are rapidly affecting our environment, and some would argue irreversibly, and therefore we are worsening our chances as human beings by changing the temperature of our weather, thereby increasing potential damage for countries like the Bahamas and those in this region because of the frequency of hurricanes that are created due to this change in global temperature. Secondly, low-lying countries such as the Bahamas and others in the Caribbean are at risk for flooding. And based on what we experienced in Grand Bahama and in Abaco and in other islands at different times, if we do not act now to reduce the impact of greenhouse gases, what we are doing is essentially contributing to our own demise. And even though the Bahamas is not one of the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, we do have a voice in the global community. And those of us that have paid attention, some of us who have participated in those international meetings, we are always encouraged when we hear successive prime ministers on the international stage advocating for small island developing states, or as we prefer to say, big ocean states such as the Bahamas. And so it is important in advance of a catastrophic event for us to put in place a regime that allows us to generate revenue so that we are able to do several things. Put in place sensors so that we can anticipate climatic events that would affect us. Allow us to build predictive models so that we have a sense of what will the Bahamas be like after a potential category 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. That we can have resources in place to prepare public infrastructure, inclusive of government buildings, so that they are able to withstand any potential catastrophic event, to amend existing legislation as we did while in government, the Public Subdivisions Act, so that we are in a position to insist on better locations to build, better standards by which we should build. Having resources is a prerequisite for us doing things in the legislative space, the policy space, and practically in terms of construction. In agriculture, if we are going to be effective in rebounding and achieving food security in the aftermath of climatic events, then we need climate-smart agriculture technologies and methodologies to help our people. And so on multiple levels, we see this as an important step in the right direction. It is a continuation, Mr. Deputy, of work that has been done before. The access benefit sharing legislation that was passed, some of you would recall, in fact, members opposite participated in the debate. The Biological Resources and Traditional Knowledge Bill of 2021 sought to establish a legal framework to provide for the protection and sustainable use of biological resources and traditional knowledge within the Bahamas, and to further enable the Bahamas to implement the Nagoya Protocols on Access Genetic Resources and the fair, equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization to the Convention on Biological Diversity. And simply put, we wanted to make sure that those genetic resources that reside within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on land or in our marine environment would be used for the benefit of the Bahamian people. So this bill, similar to the Biological Resource and Traditional Knowledge Bill, was in part about monetizing our natural resources so that first and foremost, Bahamians can benefit from it. And so it is good that both administrations have adopted and prayerfully will in all of our, or the vast majority of our actions manifest it. First and foremost, it is about Bahamian ownership. The member for Angliston loves to say it is about protecting our patrimony. And we share that view. And so, Mr. Deputy, this is a continuation of that mantra, that it is important that we control the natural resources of our country. But this was not the only bill that was introduced over the last 4.5 years that was all about the business of ownership. Another bill focused on expanding the marine protected areas, what we call our MPAs. And let me say, for those fishermen, many of whom are presently deeply concerned about what some of them term in chat groups that I'm a part of, a relaxation on non-Bahamians fishing in Bahamian waters. Let me say that we have met with many of you and have made the point that the establishment of new marine protected areas ought to occur in consultation with fishers. And we believe that that ought to be the correct approach. And wherever any oversight exists, where that did not happen, you have a right, and I believe that this administration would move swiftly to revisit any MPA where there was not consultation. Our simple default position was there had to be a consultation with all stakeholders, those that derive their living from the marine environment, in addition to those non-governmental agencies and others who use the shared space, or that is near shore areas and other waterways. The marine protected areas is yet another example of natural resources that accrue benefit to the Bahamian people. As we talk about carbon sequestration, the marine protected areas is a perfect example of how successive governments over the last several administrations have gradually extended our protection of our marine environment to a minimum of 20% of our total marine environment. We are now en route to protecting 30% of our marine environment. And it is that massive space to the tune of millions of acres that enables us to engage in discussions with global environmental funds in order to ensure that they work with us as we continue to be good stewards of the global community. And in essence, in the Bahamas, we are contributing to the protection of our neighbors, near and far, by doing our part in pulling the harmful CO2 and other carbon-related minerals out of the air in order for us to help protect the environment, to lower the global temperature. And so CO2 is but one of them, and there are other harmful, rather than minerals, harmful gases that we are playing our role through our mangroves, through our sea, through our forests. In many ways, we are functioning as the sink to pull these harmful gases out of the environment. And so there is monetary benefit. And that is why it is absolutely important for us to continue to put a value on our corals, a value on what is on and under the seabed, a value on the mangroves. All of these are extremely important because it allows us to more effectively engage in the discussion that we are engaging in today. I believe the National Trust, in its white paper that was released in 2018, made the point that there was, at least in their evaluation, some $5 billion in terms of value when you looked at the as you look at our mangroves, as you look at our grass beds, those important assets in our nearshore marine protected areas value in the billions. And this is precisely why a minister of tourism and a minister of the environment and a minister with responsibility for marine resources should hold accountable the cruise industry when it damages our seabed, and no leadership should capitulate to them in holding them responsible if we do our job in evaluating the value of what we have, the damage that they inflict, and the remedial costs or remediation costs associated with them setting right what they damage, whether through pollution or through anchors dragging on the bottom of our seabed. And so, again, this is about ownership, which is precisely why I caution the government that it, in all of its discussion thus far about this bill and the discussion about the carbon market, about the value of offsetting, the value of a voluntary and involuntary carbon market, there has been no discussion thus far in terms of the execution of this bill. So we've heard about a council being put in place that will be appointed by the Prime Minister that will provide technical advice, and we've heard about a management company. What concerns us are the following. One, most of the international contributions to this government in the past around environmental work, climate mitigation and adaptation, has been done when the government is working very closely in concert with non-governmental organizations. International agencies tend to be less trusting of central governments that find creative ways of moving resources earmarked to deal with environmental issues into their consolidated fund or for a myriad of other initiatives. And the most non-governmental agencies, governments that are committed to providing funds to other national governments who recognize that these governments may be in the environmental fight, private foundations, they would rather spend their money with NGOs whose corporate governance structure they trust more than government. And where governments have benefited, as we have in the past, it is because a structure was put in place where there was clear transparency in the fact that the funds would be ring-fenced and targeted for particular environmental related stewardship initiatives. Unfortunately, I've not been able to glean how that is going to be executed through the management company that will be involved in the management of this particular initiative. And so that is a matter, I'm sure, in wrap up that the governing side would comment on, because again, it seemed to me that the public needs to be clear. How is the public going to be the principal beneficiary of resources earned from their patrimony? And they would want to understand what percentage of all funds earned is going to a management company or is going to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas by way of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. These are issues that I trust that the remaining speakers will be able to make clear. Again, we are very much in support of us monetizing our patrimony, as we have, again, contributed to in expanding the marine protected areas, in ensuring that we put in place legislation that protect the biological diversity of the Bahamas. One example we provided when we debated that particular bill was the Elizabethae coral, where we found that there are universities, and I'm advised that the IDB report outlined that that we have issued some years 120 permits to professors globally who would come to the Bahamas. They would study some of and other research agencies, and many times they do not indicate that they are working in conjunction with multinational corporations or that they are applying for patents for any number of things that they are researching. And we would only find out in the aftermath of a patent having been issued or products having been created or a drug that is in its second trial, almost ready for release, that they benefited from some genetic material in the Bahamas. And so the legislation we put in place on looking at access benefit sharing was to mitigate against that. Again, all of those pieces of legislation that allow us to more fully take advantage of our natural resources is in our best interest, and both administrations ought to do, as we are doing today, work in tandem to make that happen. In education, for example, education is responsible for the UNESCO desk, and one of the things that is also important from a cultural standpoint, and for those of you that are in the cultural environment, this is a parallel to that effort in a sense, that in the cultural environment, there are many things that are uniquely Bahamian that we did not over time patent or protect so that Bahamians can, for future generations, benefit from those things. And so it is a wonderful thing now that the Bahamas is more fully moving in that direction, in that there are unique Bahamian practices, cultural expressions that we are seeking to patent as uniquely ours. One of the things that we do that's fairly unique, and we are no doubt looking at as a means of patenting, is just looking at the harvesting of cascarilla, the way in which we do the extraction, the way we beat the bark, for the whole process from in Michael, from the planting, the harvesting, the preparation, the extraction, etc. What along that continuum of activities is unique to us that we then ought to protect, patent, so that when others seek to utilize or to do the same, that they have to pay us some sort of royalty. And so with those words, I wish to say, Mr. Deputy, that we certainly support this bill, but we seek clarification from the government in terms of the management company. Is that the best model that we ought to use? And if so, what is the percentage of revenues generated under such an arrangement that is going to go to the Bahamian people. I'd also like to say that we, in a similar way, when we passed the fisheries bill, that was yet another attempt to protect Bahamian patrimony. In other words, it is very difficult for us to talk about the value of a particular Bahamian resource if we do not take the time to do a valuation. And so one of the things called for in the fisheries bill that is in place is that every marine species that we commercially harvest, the new fisheries bill now mandate that you must evaluate the size of the stock and then by extension, the value of the stock to then determine whether or not we are able to give permits year-round or for part of the year or every other year in order for persons to harvest and to sell. So I love the fact that Bahamians are increasingly looking at every natural resource and seeking to figure out how do we protect it in the interest of Bahamians. So that the discussion on aragonite is not a discussion about harvesting raw material and sending it overseas and why can I get one or two of those contracts, but that the discussion, while that discussion is important, it should be secondary to the discussion on what patents should we obtain for the transformation of aragonite into the wide range of products that can be produced for it. In fact, there is a Bahamian who presently have patents for aragonite, but most of their work is not done in the Bahamas, it's done overseas, because we are trapped internally in the Bahamas in a very parochial discussion around aragonite, when there should be a broader, far more sophisticated study, and it is my hope that your administration would move with some degree of urgency in liberalizing that particular market based on the science. In other words, if studies have been concluded and we've determined what quantities are available, we are then in a position to say how many licenses ought to be allocated, and then we ought to move on it. We missed that opportunity, unfortunately. You don't have to miss it. And so let me also say that what has not been mentioned in this debate, but that is also relevant to this business of carbon sequestration and climate change, is insurance. And so I wish to raise, that has been raised in a previous discussion, we talked about CRIF. And we talked about the importance of the government paying its regular premium in order to benefit in the aftermath of a climatic event, benefit from funds so that we can rebuild. Well, what is also true for fishers, one of the discussions we participated in while in the Department of Marine Resources is the COAST program. And the COAST program, again, is but one example of one of the insurances that's very relevant now in this age of climate change. Whenever there's a climatic event, different sectors of our economy need insurances that would allow those practitioners in those areas to rebound and rebound fairly quickly. And so I end simply by saying that I believe we have a marvelous opportunity to collaborate on meaningful pieces of legislation such as this, and the Free National Movement stands with the government in this regard. Our only concern is in terms of transparency, and that we hope would be addressed. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member from Marcus City.
As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, before I proceed with my contribution, I just wish to make a few points. First, I want to recognize one of my constituents, Mr. Aiden Deal, who's a future computer engineer and also a member of this year's Gentleman Club. Mr. Deal is now attending St. Anne's School, where he is ranked 4th in the graduating class of 2022 with a GPA of 3.65 and is also the school's head boy. Aiden will pursue a dual degree with Philander Smith College and the University of Arkansas. To his parents, family, and friends, I'm indeed proud of Aiden, and I wish him all the success in this chapter of life. And God bless him. Deputy Speaker, I would like to take the time also to send my heartfelt condolences to Ms. Shante Butler, to her grandmother, known as Miss B, to her mother, Miss Francine Butler, brothers Devon Taylor, Charles Butler Jr., and sister Farah Butler, on the passing of the late Mr. Charles Butler. Ms. Shante Butler serves as my personal assistant within the Ministry of Transport and Housing, and one of the main reasons I'm excelling in my first 7 months as minister. Shante is a part of a team of young, dedicated, professional Bahamians that I've built within the ministry, and Mr. Butler was indeed a giant of a man, a great role model, and indeed a family man. And for the many lives that he has touched, I'm sure he will be truly missed. May his soul rest in peace and rise in glory. Lastly, I also want to send out my condolences to Madam Speaker on the passing of her brother. I'm very close with my siblings, and I know that this time is very hard for her. I'll continue to keep her in my prayers, and I pray that his soul rest in peace. Deputy Speaker, I rise in this honorable chamber to provide my support for the Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiatives Bill, and to also speak on issues of national importance. As I've said before, Deputy Speaker, I remain grateful to the Almighty God for continuing to order my steps, and to our Prime Minister for his confidence in me. I also continue to remain thankful for the support of my cabinet and parliamentary colleagues, as well as for the tremendous assistance provided to me from the entire staff at the Ministry of Transport and Housing, especially my permanent secretary, Ms. Antoinette Thompson, my undersecretary, Ms. Gaynell Roll, and other department heads and board members. My immediate family and my wider family, that is the people of the great constituency of Elizabeth, continue to be the wind beneath my wings, and I'm truly grateful for their love and support. Before I begin my presentation, I also wish to acknowledge that April is Autism Awareness Month, and there are many people living on the autism spectrum in the Bahamas, and the numbers are increasing each year. I want to appeal for greater community understanding to bring awareness to their needs. I also wish to encourage my fellow parliamentarians to contribute to or support REACH Bahamas in their efforts to spread community awareness. Lastly, before I get into my contribution, I want to congratulate Team Bahamas on a stellar performance at the recently concluded Carifta Games, and congratulate my colleague, Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, Mario Boleg, for the job that he has done in carrying the team to Carifta. I also wish to take this time to brag about my constituent, my reason for being at Carifta, the young Diore Scott, who's at 14 years old, only learned throwing javelin 8 months prior to the Carifta Games. While she was 13, she secured the gold medal in the under 17 girls javelin and also broke the Carifta record. And so I am extremely, extremely proud of her and all of our Bahamian athletes. Deputy Speaker, our contract with the Bahamian people is guided by our party's blueprint for change. The blueprint forms the foundation of the programs and policies that this Davis-led administration will pursue over the next few years. In the introduction section of the blueprint, we wrote that the new day beckons the economic revolution, a revolution that encourages and supports new ideas, ingenuity, and creativity, a revolution that will catapult the Bahamas to its rightful place of progressive and economic success. A nation where Bahamians can only be marred by an unwillingness to rise to the apex of their God-given gifts. As we debate this bill, Deputy Speaker, I refer to the Blueprint for Change, so that all Bahamians can understand that the bill we are debating is a fulfillment of our promise to bring a new day to all areas in this country. Deputy Speaker, good governance requires sound policies that are strategic and transformative. Strategic in the sense that the policies address issues of national concern, and transformative in the view that the policies charge a new course or direction. Within the specific context of climate change, Deputy Speaker, this administration's policies demonstrate our understanding of the impact of carbon dioxide emissions on the environment and the need for the Bahamas to lead the way when it comes to adopting clean and renewable energy sources. We often talk about the three S's, sun, sand, and sea, resources we have in abundance. Two of these three resources are also abundant sources of energy with the ability to transform energy generation within the Bahamas. Deputy Speaker, I have a keen interest in energy conservation and efficient use of energy. Many people may not know that the topic of my dissertation for my master's bid was promoting sustainable development in the Bahamas, overcoming the barriers and creating renewable energy in a safe and affordable way. I've always passionately believed in the ability for the energy sector to transform our nation when it comes to access to affordable energy, as well as the pursuit of the renewable energy sources and the proper management of non-renewable sources in a responsible way for the benefit of the Bahamian people, which is why I have pursued the work that I have in the past in an effort to make an impact on the responsible management of energy resources, and it is why I now continue to loan my support to the transformation of the local energy sector. Armed with the knowledge we have of the impact of the energy sector, it is clear where our policy priorities must be. According to the World Resources Institute, the energy sector, including electricity, transport, manufacturing, and building, is the main contributor of carbon dioxide emissions, representing 73% of global emissions in 2017. Therefore, Deputy Speaker, the energy sector must find ways to reduce its carbon emissions. As a small island developing state, the Bahamas is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, primarily driven by an increase in carbon dioxide emissions. In fact, a recent report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that rapid, deep, and immediate cuts in CO2 emissions is required to avoid the world warming by 3.2 degrees Celsius this year. Deputy Speaker, a temperature rise would see our planet hit by deep heat waves, stronger storms, including hurricanes, water shortages, and a rise in sea level. Deputy Speaker, I am acutely aware of the negative impact of an increased global temperatures can have on communities. As an avid reader and news watcher, I've read and seen how communities, and in some instances, entire countries, have already been impacted by climate change. As the Member of Parliament for Elizabeth, Deputy Speaker, I am mindful of the impact of global warming to all areas of my constituency. However, I am most concerned about low-lying zones like areas off of Hannah Road and areas that are close to the sea like St. Andrews Beach Estates, Fleming Avenue, and Yamacraw Beach Drive. Can you imagine the impact on those communities if global temperatures continue to increase? Deputy Speaker, given the destruction caused in our islands by numerous hurricanes over the years, I am sure no one will ever forget the destruction brought on by Hurricane Dorian, with total damages of more than $1 billion. And I strongly believe that the time to act is now. This bill, Deputy Speaker, beckons a new day in our nation's approach towards climate change. The Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiatives Bill signals to the global community that our nation's voice will be heard and that our country intends to be an active participant in discussions on efforts to reduce the levels of greenhouse gas emissions. The Bahamas is ranked among 100 countries with the lowest levels of greenhouse gas emissions by the World Resources Institute, collectively contributing to around 3.6% of the total global emissions. This observation is made even more significant, Deputy Speaker, when one notes that the top three of the greenhouse gas emissions are People's Republic of China, the European Union, and the United States, which account for 41.5% of total global emissions. Deputy Speaker, it is my view that this bill can be used as a strategic tool in the conduct of foreign policy. For example, in our interaction with some of the world's top emitters of greenhouse gases, the issue of climate change can be raised with a view to drawing attention to the impact of climate change on small island developing states, holding the top emitters accountable and agitating for a greater commitment and accountability from the top emitting countries. We must negotiate in the best interest of the Bahamas, given our continued stewardship of our environment. The Climate Change Market and Carbon Market Initiative Bill builds on the Paris Agreement that was negotiated in 2015 at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in France. The long-term goal of the Paris Agreement is to keep the rise in mean global temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Deputy Speaker, by introducing this bill to Parliament more than 6 years after the formation of the Paris Agreement, this Davis-led administration is demonstrating that it takes the issue of climate change seriously. In fact, honorable members would recall that in November 2021, our Prime Minister attended the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Glasgow, Scotland, and spoke on the need for greater global action in addressing climate change. He walked away from that conference with a promise to the Bahamian people that progress was being made to allow the Bahamas to earn credits on the carbon market. Well, promise made, promise fulfilled. This bill, Deputy Speaker, beckons a new day in unleashing an economic revolution. The bill makes provision for the establishment of an advisory council on the trading and management of carbon assets. Under Article 22 of the bill, the options for participation in an initiative authorizing trade and carbon credits are clearly stipulated. These options include bilateral and multilateral trading with other countries, trading with private party entities, and voluntary trading. Deputy Speaker, among other stipulations, a key requirement for carbon market agreements is the fostering of sustainable development. As outlined in Article 8 of the bill, Deputy Speaker, any surplus fund must be deposited into either a sub-fund of the Foreign Wealth Fund or special purpose entity established solely for such purpose. The Davis administration is doing what is necessary to preserve the future of our environment and our economy. These two objectives are not mutually exclusive, even though there are developers and corporate interests who may approach environmental conservation with annoyance, but the two go together. We are demonstrating to the Bahamian people that the economic power of innovative, environmentally conscious, and sustainable development in the new Bahamas we are building during this new day. Deputy Speaker, the bill also makes provisions for the establishment of a national emissions registry with a registrar. Some of the primary functions of the registrar will include the oversight of efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the number of carbon credits issued by the Bahamas. Deputy Speaker, this bill is a great first step. This administration is prepared to continue to do what it takes to preserve the Bahamas for future generations. We all have a part to play, Deputy Speaker. Community and individual responsibility on this issue is essential. We can each play a greater role in curbing greenhouse gas emissions by promoting the planting of trees in our constituencies and by encouraging backyard farming. Small, consistent actions, when taken on a collective level, can achieve big results. The issue of tackling climate change requires community buy-in, and I am certain that the Bahamas can be a model nation in this regard. As Minister of Transport and Housing, Deputy Speaker, I am aware that the transportation industry is one of the largest contributors to the greenhouse gas emissions. Over the next few weeks and months, my ministry will engage in policy reviews and research on how best we can contribute to reducing carbon emissions. For example, in Brazil, Deputy Speaker, I'm advised that flexible fuel vehicles which run on a proportion of gasoline and ethanol are dominating the passenger vehicle market with a 94% market share of all new cars and light vehicles sold. I cite the example of Brazil, Deputy Speaker, in highlighting that change from gas and diesel-powered vehicles is possible. Deputy Speaker, can we imagine the impact on greenhouse gas emission if our local automobile companies can perhaps explore a partnership with flexible and alternative fuel vehicle distributors? Going a bit further, Deputy Speaker, my ministry will also explore opportunities to use solar energy technology in future affordable housing subdivisions, sustainably reducing the monthly energy consumption bill for households. I'm advised, Deputy Speaker, that the government of Barbados has undertaken a significant affordable housing development in Lancaster, St. James, Barbados, that will be solar energy powered. As the Minister of Transport and Housing, I will reach out to my counterpart in Barbados on best practices and how we can have a similar housing development created in the Bahamas. In the coming weeks, I also intend, Deputy Speaker, to reach out to local solar energy firms with a view to partnering in such ventures. Deputy Speaker, on the issue of housing subdivisions, I seek your permission to address several concerns very briefly in the public domain with respect to Pinecrest subdivision. From the onset, Deputy Speaker, let me emphatically state that the suggestions being made by some are simply not true. Houses in the Pinecrest subdivision are being built to the highest standard, which exceeds the minimum requirements set by the Bahamian Building Code. The houses, Deputy Speaker, are being built from concrete blocks, reinforced with poured concrete and steel columns and beams inside the blocks. This system is approved for use in the Bahamas and has been in use for decades. Additionally, Deputy Speaker, construction is being supervised by a team of construction professionals, including 2 licensed structural engineers, as well as the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Housing. Deputy Speaker, I do not wish to be drawn into a partisan debate, as my focus at the Department of Housing is solely on providing quality, affordable housing for Bahamian families. However, I caution the Bahamian people to be mindful of some critical voices, as their agenda is clear. Deputy Speaker, no amount of noise or unfair criticism can erase the fact that under the previous administration, of which many sitting opposite were a part, not one single affordable home was built. I repeat, under the previous administration, which many opposite were a part, not one single house. And I saw the member for Kalani and Pinecrest. I saw the photos floating around. And I thought it very funny that he was in Pinecrest inspecting a house that's being built by the New Day government when he, just 7 months ago, was the Prime Minister. He could have built houses under his administration to inspect. But I am glad, I'm happy that the New Day government, a progressive government, was able to provide houses that he himself can now go and inspect. And I'm quite certain that he was very impressed by what he saw, hence the reason he left. He have a new job. But based on the criticism, Deputy Speaker, it is perhaps clear that the main intent is to discourage Bahamians from seeking to become homeowners in the Pinecrest subdivision and to damage the reputation. And see, we have to be careful, Deputy Speaker, when we come in here and play this political bantering and showboating. Because you're not, if you think you're coming in here and you're making your assertions and you're attacking me, you're not. You're not attacking me. First of all, I got broad shoulders, I could take the licks. But who you are really attacking are the developer. You're attacking Bahamian contractors, many of whom did not have a job for the last 2.5 years and are so happy and excited to be back to work. That's who you are attacking, right? You are attacking the Department of Housing technical staff who've been sitting and waiting for the day when building houses returned to the Department of Housing, which the law speaks about. That's who you're attacking. You are attacking qualified Bahamians who work at the Ministry of Works, who have been inspecting and reviewing and organizing and viewing properties all over the Bahamas. They've been all over doing their job. The same civil servants that were working when you were the Prime Minister. That's who you are attacking. So you're not insulting me. You're not attacking the Minister of Housing, and keep doing it if you think you are. You're actually attacking Bahamians who are working hard to build this Bahamas under a New Day government. So let me just make it clear that no amount of unfair criticism, Deputy Speaker, will stop or slow down our mission to deliver affordable housing for Bahamians. Focus. We had a service with parliamentarians a few months back where they spoke. They told us about distractions were coming, right? And they said, stay focused. So, Deputy Speaker, I'm focused. I'm focused on the blueprint and the agenda because we going for our second term. So, Deputy Speaker, as I wrap up, I am proud today to stand and represent the people of the Elizabeth constituency. And I am pleased to provide this update on our efforts in the constituency. We have been issuing food vouchers to constituents during the last 3 months because many are still falling on hard times. At our constituency office, we understand that there are still some families hurting, therefore we remain committed to assisting in a dignified and confidential manner as best as we can. We continue our breakfast meals where we serve breakfast during the last Friday of each month from 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. at our constituency office. Our cleanup exercises are ongoing, including the removal of garbage, derelict vehicles, and the cleaning of yards. As the start of the hurricane season is fast approaching, we intend to give greater focus on drainage cleaning in the coming weeks. We've introduced the Elizabeth Training Institute, where persons in the constituency can gain firsthand training on resume writing and job interview coaching. The ETI also provide preparation training for the BJC and BGCSE examinations, which will start in the month of September. During the Easter holiday, we held our first ever community extravaganza for children in the constituency. We also had a constituency-sponsored basketball team from Elizabeth take part in the Glory Basketball Jamboree, making it through the first round of plays. Development of parks and basketball courts is in progress. The focus is to ensure that parks are clean and basketball courts are well equipped with lighting. The constituency office is in the process of purchasing a playground for the Thelma Gibson preschool, and a vehicle has been purchased for use by the Crime Watch Association in the Elizabeth constituency, and we will be having that inspected and wrapped shortly so we can begin our rotations. In the summer, the Literacy Empowerment for Academic Proficiency, also known as LEAP, will be launched in the constituency to increase the functional literacy rate. Deputy Speaker, as you have heard, we are busy in Elizabeth, and I am determined to be a hands-on and committed MP with a view to making a difference. It is indeed a new day in the Elizabeth constituency. Deputy Speaker, the thing about being the ones who build institutions and set up foundations for national development is that many often can't fathom how transformative the work will be while it is being done. And as generations of people go on to benefit from that initial foundation, it simply becomes a part of everyday life. Future generations won't care who did the work. They will only be glad that the work was done. We've seen this time and time again with work that PLP governments have done. NIB, UB, the Defense Force, Urban Renewal, BAMZ, you name it, we've built it. There will come a day when millions upon millions in revenue that a clean up, environmentally forward Bahamas makes on the carbon market is simply accepted as something that the Bahamas, with its responsible approach to sustainable development, simply benefits from. I wanted to go on record that on this day, it was a PLP government, the Davis administration, who made this transformation possible. This bill, Deputy Speaker, beckons a new day in our journey to managing climate change and to make the nation's voice heard loud and clear on the issue of greenhouse gas emissions. Deputy Speaker, Elizabeth proudly supports this bill, New Day bill that beckons a transformative path for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member for Elizabeth. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to first, Mr. Deputy, express my appreciation to the people of Fort Charlotte who have afforded me this opportunity to speak on their behalf in this honorable House. And I just want to say that on the 7th, on Saturday, the day before Mother's Day, we will be hosting the Mothers of Fort Charlotte at the Balmoral Club. And we want the mothers to come and have a good time. You know, we want them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we want them to sip some soft drinks and paint. And here, you know, socialize, have a meal, and we will have patrol and a number of entertainers and artists. Really say thank you. Thank you for the extraordinary work they do in raising our community and taking care of our community. Also, on next Thursday, we will invite the community to come to Eva Hilton. And we want to talk about backyard farming. And I want to thank the Minister of Agriculture, who will provide the opportunity for us to show the community that farming is sexy. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And we will provide backyard farming kits to residents who wish to grow some okra and peas and corn in the backyard. And also the chairman of BAIC Southern Shores want to say thank you so very much. Mr. Deputy, in 1965, the 27th of April, 2 days before that, the leadership of the Progressive Liberal Party met in caucus to strategize. There was one woman in the room, only one. And today, I want to recognize her. Because in that room, as they were discussing what to do after all the gerrymandering and that took place in 1962, the PLP won the majority, but the UBP won the majority of seats, the PLP won the majority of votes, but did not win the government. And in this room, Mr. Deputy, a woman who told the men, the leadership, if you were to boycott this House of Assembly, I will not vote for you again. And she challenged and said, we must do something radical that will open up the minds and the eyes of the Bahamian people. And that is what the outcome was, Black Tuesday. That makes before you, Mr. Deputy, that symbol of authority of the Speaker, and it has the crown of the sovereign, was thrown out of this Parliament and the hourglass, right? Yeah. Right, both of them. And we see that it changed the consciousness of our people to take action, that the majority of the people had the right, had the God-given right to run this country. Yes. And that woman, Effie Walks, my definition of a national hero, the only woman in the room. Yep. And therefore, as we celebrate, we know the men, but we don't know the soul woman who challenged. Mr. Deputy, don't you think we need to do something about that? Well, you know, I am proud to say I'm a feminist because I was raised by a mother who raised 12 of us by herself. She was mommy and she was daddy. Yeah. She was great. And therefore, I know that I owe a debt to that woman in the room. Yes. Mr. Deputy, it is my distinct pleasure to wrap up the debate. But what is the significance of this debate? And that is in September, for 2 days, September 2019, 2 days, Mr. Deputy, for 3 days, September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, this country, after those 3 days, will never be the same. Abaco and Grand Bahama, 185 miles an hour wind, gushing up to 220 miles an hour. Tidal wave coming over the land of 20 feet. 20 feet above the homes, washing away our compatriots. Husband holding on to children, and wife holding on, mother holding on to children. And the wave just snatches your loved one out of your arms, never to be seen again. Mr. Deputy, this is a phenomenon which has a direct cause: greenhouse gases. As honorable members have eloquently stated, caused by human activity, primarily the industrialized countries. We are the ants and they are the elephants. They have caused the problem, but we are the ones whom the United Nations have declared to be the most vulnerable, island nation states. And in the Paris Convention, as well as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, these same elephants, not to stereotype elephants, these same industrialized countries made pledges, most of which have not materialized. We have been making moral appeals for climate justice, fallen primarily on deaf ears. And what this bill enables us and forces us to do, as the Honorable Member for Elizabeth, in the Blueprint for Change, is that we're not going to wait and rely on moral appeals to the industrialized countries. Because, Mr. Speaker, as so many of the honorable members have stated, we have something in our hands. We have something in our hands, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have something in our hands. And that is, this small country represents the lungs. Most people thought it was the Amazon in Brazil and its neighboring countries. But it is right here in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the scientific evidence will demonstrate to the world that the seagrass that the honorable member of East Grand Bahama was giving us some of the scientific attributes of the seagrass, that the seagrass is more absorbent than the forest. The seagrass, one of the very few plants that flowers under the water, grows under the water, and flowers, a flowering plant that grows under the water, is the most absorbent in terms of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And this seagrass, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is abundant in the Bahamas. But what most people don't recognize, Mr. Deputy, is that the reason it is in our hands is because of our conduct. From 1959, from one administration to the next, from that first marine park was established in 1959, we have established marine parks, land parks throughout this Commonwealth, up to now 32 parks, 2 million acres of territory has been put aside from unregulated exploitation. In other words, Mr. Deputy, it is because of the stewardship of the Bahamian people that this asset exists today. From one administration to the next. I remember when I sat in the cabinet before, large swaths of territory and sea being put for posterity. In other words, like a savings for future generation. And it is this patrimony, this asset, that now is being recognized by the world as the lungs of this Americas. And therefore, Mr. Deputy, the reason why earlier this month I had the privilege to be asked by the Prime Minister to lead a delegation to Gabon The reason why Gabon, another small country in Central Africa on the Atlantic coast of Africa, it is located in the Congo Basin. The Congo Basin is recognized globally as the lungs of Africa. And this small country with 2.1 million people has oil. It has oil. It exports oil, but it made a decision that this product, which has a global carbon footprint, that notwithstanding the oil, that it will become a global symbol and template of green development. And over 80% of its territory has been put in a park, a green park. Its forest produces some of the most sought after timber in the world. And what Gabon said is, we're not going to export our timber anymore. We're not going to export it to China and so on. It decided to diversify. It decided that all of its timber will be manufactured in Gabon. And today, Gabon has showcases of the top class furniture made with its wood in Miami, in London, in Paris. In fact, while we were there, we visited their special economic zone, and it produces one of the best quality of plywood. Remember during Dorian, we couldn't get plywood. It produces one of the best quality of plywood, exporting it to the European Union, to the United States, and so on. And what they have done, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is they have established a sovereign wealth fund. And the asset is put in a sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund is not under the control of any ministry. It is managed by professionals. And we sat with the executive director, their lawyers, and their other leadership, young people, young Gabonese professional people running over $2 billion worth of asset. And they are engaged with foreign investors. And they are moving the economy along the path of sustainability. Over 40% of their energy, notwithstanding the possession of petroleum and oil and so on, over 40% of their energy is generated by hydroelectric dams, and also increasingly now by solar. So here we are in a country producing oil, and their aspiration, their policy, and their actual projects are moving them towards sustainability. They log, but they log responsibly. And we also visited their space station. Yes, their space station. They have 2 satellites up in space. And when we visited the space station, young Gabonese scientists, and they are managing when they demonstrated to us, we can see the position of this satellite. They can pick up anyone poaching their elephants or illegal logging activities within the forest. Mr. Deputy, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is spending $50 million on the stadium. I asked Professor Lee White, a world-renowned expert in the environment, who's now the Minister of Sea, Land, and the Environment in Gabon. I said, Minister, how much what was the cost of putting a satellite up in space? He said they started with 10 million euros. I would have thought that that infrastructure I saw would have been beyond our capability. But it is not. It is not. Here we have, Gabon is 100,000 square miles of territory. The Bahamas is 100,000 square miles of territory. The same area. The only difference is that it's one contiguous landmass. In our case, we are an archipelago, but the same size. We have, why is it that people are coming from Asia? People are coming from the United States, from South America to poach in our waters. The honorable member from Marco City spoke about the fisheries law and how to value and protect. Well, the reason why they are all coming to poach in our waters is because of our stewardship. It's because whether it's the party didn't matter, because the asset kept increasing irrespective of which party was in power. That's right. So what we see is that we have a bipartisan commitment to preserving and using the resources of the country responsibly. That is why we have a lobster season. That is why we have stopped the exportation of conch. That is why we have engaged in other words, it's the same thing that Gabon is doing with its forests. And in Gabon, Norway paid them 150 million euros, which is more than $150 million, for carbon credit. So we are not engaged in a theoretical, fanciful exercise, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In the Paris Convention, Paris Agreement, and also the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, it lays out a global standard to establish a carbon credit. We talk about transparency. For there to be a carbon credit, you have to go through a number of processes. First of all, the asset must be mapped. It can't be mapped by anybody. It has to be mapped by scientists. And we have scientists in the Bahamas right now engaged in the mapping of segments of the seagrass within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Secondly, Mr. Deputy, it has to be verified. And there is another group of scientists recognized globally for the process of verification. Then after it's verified, it has to be certified by the United Nations agency. And then you have a tradable carbon credit. And that process is underway as we speak. A group of scientists who will be publishing a paper dealing with some of the things related to the seagrass. Another group of scientists which will be verifying the the mapped carbon assets, and then certification. And there are persons, I would call them financial actors, including cryptocurrency actors, who are just waiting to trade the carbon credit. There are mutual funds in the Bahamas, well known to all of us, and some of us may have some of our savings in them, who have indicated to the government that they are ready to trade these carbon credits. So the monetization of this asset is beyond speculative. It's not speculative. It is with a certainty. And the reason for that, Mr. Deputy, is that all of the member countries of the United Nations who have signed the Paris Accord and the Framework Convention have agreed to become net zero by 2050. Now, we know that if you have a huge line of cruise ships, you cannot overnight become carbon neutral. It takes time to retrofit. It takes time to move towards renewable power generation. And it is this particular transitional period that has created the need and the demand for carbon credit. And the Bahamas is one of those countries that is essentially, notwithstanding the carbon footprint, almost carbon zero. Right, but it has such an abundance of what will be carbon credit that surplus could be traded by others. And you know, Mr. Deputy, I never knew. I have to confess my ignorance. I learned that one of the cruise lines which bring cruise ships into the Bahamas has acquired carbon credit by funding a green project in another country. And they claim that as a carbon credit. So clearly the demand, the need is there. And it is a way of mitigation, it's a way of offset, and we are the suppliers. We will be the suppliers. Now, the honorable members raise a number of questions. So we see the stewardship, the significance of the seagrass, and there may be some question about whether the mangroves are terrestrial or whether they are marine. But the fact of the matter, it doesn't matter, because we know that it is a carbon sink. And as a carbon sink, it will constitute the basis of carbon credit. Mr. Deputy, this gives the Bahamas the opportunity to innovate. In fact, Mr. Deputy, in the discussion, we met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs on 2 occasions. We met with the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of the Environment, the Minister of Works, and also with the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Special Economic Zone dealing with diversification. And the outcome is that they recognize that the Bahamas, and sometimes we don't appreciate our own assets. This is a financial center, and the concentration of technical expertise which is in this jurisdiction means we have the cryptocurrency market, which is here, and we have exchanges, which are here. We have a very mature financial center, and some of those major players have made commitments to the government to trade some of the credits. So what the leaders in Gabon have indicated that it is likely that they can put some of their carbon credits on the Bahamian exchange. So we have the opportunity to become a market leader in terms of sustainable development and carbon trading, not just for ourselves, but also for other countries because of the concentration here of financial capacity and resources. The honorable member for Marco City raised the question of management and transparency and ownership. And Mr. Deputy, these assets, unlike what has happened in other areas of our inventory of assets, whether we're talking about intangible or other natural resources, we know we have had people come into our jurisdiction doing research, and they end up holding the patent and trading them to pharmaceutical companies. In fact, when I served as Minister of Education, it was only when I went to the Juray Center, I saw this huge publication on bush medicine. In other words, the traditional knowledge of Bahamians about medicinal use of plants and so on. You had people coming over the years, sitting and talking to mama and uncle and going in the bush. You know, we have a thing with the bush because that is what kept us going, right? We know, there's that knowledge. But Mr. Deputy, we only see it as knowledge when it comes back to us as a white tablet. But when our parents and grandparents mix that bush and boil that tea and force you to drink it, we don't see it, we don't appreciate, and that is where the Europeanization and the colonial conditioning, where the wealth of knowledge passed down from generation to generation. But these foreign people see it, and they come, they talk, and we so enamored with them that they have taken time to come and talk with us. We give them all the secrets, and then they go, and then when we get it back, we could barely afford the medicine. So clearly, this is not that kind of enterprise. The seagrass and the mangroves are sovereign assets. They are not there to be taken over by a foreign investor. They will be held through a sovereign wealth fund. And the member really anticipate what's coming next. There will be a companion, a follow-up legislation establishing the Sovereign Wealth Fund and a clear commitment to get the best talent. And the honorable member for Kalani, Mr. Deputy, we know that one party has a monopoly on intellect. We know that, right? We know that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas we have some brilliant young scientists, and I'm meeting them all the time. When we were, Minister Miller, honorable member for the Golden Isles, right? We were in Gabon with some of our technical. You have Charles Hamilton. We have Danielle Hannick, Rochelle Newbold, I mean, and I know so many even younger, like Kelly Armstrong, and the young, brilliant people all over the world, not just here, but in the Bahamian diaspora. So there is the commitment, Mr. Deputy, to utilize the best knowledge, expertise, and competence to manage and guide this process under clear policies. And it has to be transparent. It cannot be a carbon credit by secret because of the mapping, the verification, and the certification, because it has to have currency. And currency has to be internationally certified. So the Honorable Member for Marco City did raise these issues, and we will see in very short order. The Honorable Member for Kalani said, well, look here, I see so many times we come here and we pass law and nothing happened. Well, let me tell you something. This train is moving. This train is moving, and also the issue of valuation and transparency are critical, because it's not simply a national event. We're talking about an asset that will have a global stamp by the United Nations and well-recognized scientists. And there would need to be scientific involvement even in the management company because of the expertise. But this is the exciting part. This is an opportunity now for us to incentivize, inspire our young people, that you can be engaged in a highly specialized scientific field, and you can do that at home. And that is what the young people I met in Gabon, anywhere in the world they can work. And so many young people we met, they came home because they wanted to be part of building this new economy for Gabon. And they see the vision, they feel it, and they're making it possible. And the Bahamas has that opportunity today to inspire our children who feel that they had to stay off, and whose parents in some cases encourage them to stay off. Now, this is an area, just like cryptocurrency. We see that the Bahamian economy, I mean, this feels like the 1950s and 60s, because we see the economy that is being recreated, a new architecture, that is the digital space, which is part of the global technological revolution. We are living in a revolutionary time. And what is inspiring to me is for the Bahamas within our region. The Bahamas is already within our region. We are at the forefront in terms of digital assets, digital dollar, crypto exchange, and now we will be at the forefront in terms of this carbon credit exchange. And it is in that context, Mr. Deputy, that the concerns expressed have been noted, and we certainly undertake to bring the Sovereign Wealth Fund and to report to the Cabinet, to the Parliament, to account to the Parliament about the implementation process as it proceeds. And with that, Mr. Deputy, I thank honorable colleagues and for a very insightful, constructive debate.
Yes.
And while there were some heated exchange on the issue of substance, we agree and we share. And you know, Mr. Deputy, as I learned more and more, and I saw the continuity, sometimes the heat of argument obscures that continuity and the stewardship. And I think that that is what ought to inform this new sector of the economy as we move forward. So with that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you and ask for colleagues to support the bill.
Thank you, honorable member. It has been
I wish now to move for the second reading and committal of the bill, Climate Change and Carbons Market Initiative Bill 2022.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for the act to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emission. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emission.
Further second reading of bills.
Mr. Deputy, I now move that the House resolves itself into committee of the whole with Seabreeze in the chair.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that this House do now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the honorable member of Seabreeze in the chair. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The House will now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with the member of Seabreeze in the chair.
Committee of the Whole.
Madam Chair, I move for the long title of the bill be approved.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The motion is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that the short title of the bill be approved.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The short title is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 1 preliminary, Sections 2, 3, and 4 be agreed.
Second, section 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, and 4.
It has been moved and agreed and seconded. Clause 2, 3, and 4 of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 2 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that Part 2 of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Clause 2 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 3 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that Part 3 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Part 3 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 4 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that Part 4 of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Part 4 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 5 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded. Part 5 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion carried. Part 5 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 6 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded. Part 6 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Part 6 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 7 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded. Part 7 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Part 7 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that Part 8 of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded. Part 8 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. Part 8 of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chair, I move that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
Schedule.
Oh, the schedule.
You got two schedules. First second schedule.
Okay. Not here, though. I don't have it in the thing.
First guy.
Oh, okay. Oh, Madam Chair, I move that the first schedule of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the first schedule of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried that the first schedule of the bill is agreed.
And I'll move that the second schedule of the bill be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the second schedule of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The second schedule of the bill is agreed.
I now move, Madam Chair, that the bill in its entirety be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Madam Chair, I now move that the Deputy Speaker to take the chair.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the Deputy Speaker do now take the chair. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The Deputy Speaker will now take the chair.
You're on the right side of the mountain this time.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg leave to report that the Committee of the Whole have examined the bill, having made no amendments thereto.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Hold on, wait. Okay. Honorable members, the Honorable Member for Seabreeze has reported that the committee has examined the bill, having made no amendments thereto. The third reading and passing of bills.
Mr. Deputy, I now move for the third reading and passing of the Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiative Bill 2022.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emissions.
Order that the bill do, order that this bill do now pass and the title therefore declared to be Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiatives Act 2022. Further third reading of bills.
No further third readings, Mr. Deputy.
Order that the clerk do take the bills passed by the House today to the Honorable Senate for their deliberation and to desire their concurrence. Adjournment? We going down? Oh, there we go.
No, we met, Mr. Deputy. We will suspend at this moment and resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the House, that the business of the House be suspended until 10 a.m. on the 28th at 10 a.m. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. It has been moved and seconded that the House stands suspended until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
All right.
Fate worse than death. We're gonna spend the night in Nassau. Fate worse than death.
Don't give me on this back.